Okay, in other news, I would like to introduce you guys to our very next speaker. But before I do so, I would like to give a shout out to Platformatic because they flew in James this morning. So he's flying in from Fresno, which I think it's far away. How long is your flight?
About 2 hours.
2 hours? Okay, that's not too bad. Never mind. Still, can I please get a round of applause for Platformatic today?
Platformatic.
Let me introduce you guys to James. James is a longtime Node.js core contributor and currently the longest active member of the TSC, over 10 years now. He's also a principal engineer on the Cloudflare Workers runtime, and today he's walking us through what Node.js compatibility really means. Please welcome James, everybody.
Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. I'm going to try to code and talk into the mic at the same time. If you can't hear me, throw something at me. I'm good. All right, so I'm James Snell, or Jay Snell everywhere. If you've been around Node, you've probably seen my name around. I've worked on a lot of the core features over the past 10 years. Introduction of HTTP2, the original version of the URL parser. There's a bunch there. So if you use Node, you're in any capacity you're using. But I don't just work on Node. I also work on Cloudflare Workers, the actual runtime itself. There's a lot of confusion. A lot of folks look at Workers and they assume that it's Node or it's using like Dino or something else under the covers. No, it's its own runtime. We build on top of V8, but it is a completely bespoke new runtime. Well, not new. It's been a number of years now, but it's completely different from Node. And when I started with Cloudflare back in about almost 4 years ago, I was hired specifically to make it work like Node, to make it Node compatible. And as my friend Matteo Kalina, who's one of the co-founders of Platformatic, likes to say, if you want something to be Node compatible, just ship Node. There's some reasons for that, and I'm going to break down just a little bit here about kind of what is the scope of the problem, right? Why is it actually so difficult to make things work like Node, right? If you look at Dino, for instance, Dino came out initially. They were like, "We're going to be different." Ryan had all these regrets, things that he didn't like about Node, about the way that ecosystem evolved. I'm going to do something different. We're going to have Dino. It's going to be centered on focused on standards. It's going to work like the browsers. We need a different mic. Is this better? A little better? Okay, cool. All right, so the whole intent coming out the gate with Dino was that it was going to be different. But now, what are they doing now? They've spent the past 3 years making it work like Node, right? Bun comes out, and out the gate, Jared's like, you know what? This thing needs to work like Node, right? That's where all the developers are. That's what if you look at NPM, there's millions of modules out there that assume that you're running Node. And in Cloudflare Workers, completely different environments, we have users that are like, cool, this is great. Make it work like Node. Cool, all right, thank you. It's a lot of work. All the gray, you saw my picture on there? It was all, didn't have as much gray. This is 10 years of working on Node. Getting quite gray at this point. So, what is the fundamental problem? So a number of years ago, I developed, when I was doing some consulting work for Nearform, I developed this puzzle, and it was really intended to kind of, what happened to my, there we go. This puzzle, the original version of the puzzle was originally just kind of teaching people how Node works, right? And it was much more complicated. This is a much more simplified version. The trick of the puzzle is, what message does this print to the console, all right? And in order to get get it correct, you kind of have to know like the order of operations. How does a queue microtask relate to a process next tick and a timeout? How do these things actually relate to one another? The original puzzle was much more complicated. This one, I think you can just look at it and see, what is it supposed to print, right? So let's actually run this and let's confirm. Let's go node puzzle. Hold on, if I can actually type, I'll be doing fantastic. All right, big surprise, it prints hello. All right. Now, this original version of the puzzle, this is written in CommonJS, right, which is the original model for module system for Node. If I ran this exact same code as ESM, you think it would have the same result? Right? It's exact same code, right? You can see that if I just come over here and look at this one here. It's the exact same code between these two. The only difference between these two files is that I have one is JS and the other is MJS. So let's see what happens in Node.
Oh,
Get a different result. Am I standing on something? There we go. All right. So, a show of hands. Who do you think? What do you think Dino's going to print? Is it going to be the same thing? All right. Let's try. Let's go. Oh no. That's unfortunate. All right. Let me scroll up here and uncomment this one line. Okay. Again, Dino's close to being compatible. Nope, that still didn't work. Oh, all right, what do I have to do? All right, let's rename this file to puzzle.cjs, and then let's try that in Dino. Hey, it worked. Or, wait, no, it didn't. So we have a different result. So now we have 2 runtimes, 3 results. All right, let's take a look at Bun. Same thing. Ah, crap. All right, 3 runtimes, 4 results. Now, I also have running here a local version of Cloudflare Workers. Let's see what happens here. It's the same code. I'm going to send my request to it. And all I got there was EHL. I didn't even get the full thing. It's the same code, all JavaScript, but what the hell is going on, right? Why are these different? Why are we getting different results? These are all supposed to be compatible with each other, right? We haven't even talked about API surface. We're just talking about running a little bit of code. Well, the difference comes down in the semantics of these actual methods that I'm calling. So Q microtask is the standard, right? It's part of the, it's a web API standard. It's not part of the language. It's part of the web platform, right? So that's different than actual ECMAScript, right? Process next tick, that's a node-specific thing. There is no standard other than the code, right? And there's no way to verify that it works other than running the tests. Set timeout, well, that's a web standard, but Node implements it differently than everyone else, right? It returns an object, not a number. We'll see. I'll look at that a little bit more. Promise resolve, that is standard. Cool. Hey, we got something standard from the language. And then set immediate, that again is a node-specific thing, right? And the behavior of every one of these depends on specifically how the runtimes actually implement them, right? So Q microtask and process next tick in Node, whenever control flow goes from JavaScript back down to C++, that is when Node will drain these queues. And it drains them in a very specific order. It does the next ticks first, and then the Q microtasks, right? So in this code, to get the right, H and then E, right? Node is always draining those next ticks first, even though that's scheduled afterwards, right? Well, in Cloudflare Workers, we implement process next tick as Q microtask. We just defer. So if we run them in this order, we get the E first and then the H, right? Dino originally had this in the opposite order as well. Now they've done some work and they've switched it, right? Set timeout here, that's, there really is no standard implementation for set timeout, right? There is an API definition, but every runtime implements that differently. And it's always based on the actual implementation of the event loop. Well, in Node, we use libuv. Dino uses Tokyo. Bun has its own, I can't remember what they call it. In Workers, we have a library called KJ. These are all different event loop implementations. They all have different semantics, right? Promise resolve, hey, that's supposed to work the same way in everything, right? Well, except that uses the microtask queue, and the language leaves it up to the runtimes to decide when to drain the microtask queue. So, you can have variances based on, what runtime you're in and what these things are actually doing, right? And then set immediate, that's a node-specific thing where it runs that callback immediately on the next, at the end of the event loop turn,
right? So that's another queue that's in here that all the other runtimes have to figure out how to implement in a consistent way, right? So yes, all of these runtimes implement these APIs, and for a lot of folks, right, just the presence of the API implies that they're compatible. Well, we see here that that's fundamentally not true, right? So in Workers, one of the things that I'm currently doing right now this week, and it's going to be a feature coming in soon, I'm implementing the Node file system API, Node.js, Workers. Great, except Workers does not have a file system to implement on top of. We don't expose the file system, right? It's there is no POSIX thing, and there's no Windows thing. There's nothing. There's nothing there as far as the file system. So the first task is I have to go implement a virtual file system for Workers, and then I have to figure out some way to get this API service to actually work. And let me give you an idea. That the file system API, there's something like 250 some odd individual APIs, and if you look at just one of these, let's look at just write. The polymorphic signature on here. There's actually like 5 or 6 different variations on here, and there's even variations within these. So just the presence of the API is not enough, right? It's how do you implement all the different options, right? Do we implement all the same encodings? Do we implement all the same, same way it does file systems? Most file systems are different. Some will represent your file names as UTF-8. Others are just regular byte streams, right? This is why in Node, we actually allow you to specify a file path as a buffer, because you might just do raw bytes. Well, every operating system is different, and here within Workers, we're implementing a brand new file system where we also have to make these decisions. So it's like, just to become even slightly more compatible with Node, we actually have to go through a whole bunch of system engineering just to make these kind of decisions. All right. So the scope of the problem is actually quite large. Let's look at another common one here. I don't think I actually have it up. Let me see here. Might not have opened it. Ah, this one here. Okay. Hopefully you can read this. This is basically just a simple script. We're intentionally having an error, right? So the first one, I'm calling new URL, standard API, not passing any arguments. That will throw because I'm not passing it any arguments. Second one, I'm giving it a bad URL, right? And catching that. Now, pay attention on this console logs. I'm printing the message and then the code. The error code is a node-specific thing that we added a number of years ago because everyone was, we do an error message, right? We have a typo in the error message. We go to fix the error message. We found out we broke half the planet because somebody was like, rejects parsing the error message. And since we added a period, everything died. That happened on more than one occasion. I personally broke NPM multiple times by fixing an error message. So in Node, every time we changed an error message, it had to be a some major change. So what we did was we added these static codes as an alternative. So those don't change, but the error message can, right? So we added this. It's a node-specific thing, and if we run, this example, let me see where I'm at here. There we go. We can see we get the error message over here, and then we have the code. This error missing args, error invalid URL. Okay, seems innocent enough, right? But what if we run this exact same code in Dino? Okay, we get a different error message and no code, right? So if you've written your application code to depend on the error messages, you're screwed. If you're depending on the error code, you're also screwed. This is not going to work, right? So again, it's not just the presence of the API; it's what it's actually doing. And if you think that well, it's just an error; it's not that big of a deal. One of the ways that I broke NPM is an old version of the glob module, right? It would sit there and you give it a pattern, and then as it was evaluating that pattern, it's going through the file system. If you hit a symbolic link that had a circular reference, right, then it would sit there and start going into this infinite loop, right? Different operating systems like Mac and Windows and stuff had different limits for when that would throw. right? And it would throw it at a different point, and it would throw it with a different error. So glob was actually programmed at that point to look for specific errors to know when to stop itself from going into this loop. Well, we changed the implementation of that so the error changed, and so that module ended up breaking, and that was just changing when the error got thrown, right? So, errors are as much a part of your API surface as anything else, not just the error, but when you throw it, how you throw it, what the message is, if there's any additional information in there. It's a terrible thing. And it's absolutely terrible, but we all do this, right? We all depend on errors. And folks don't think of it as being part of the API surface. None of the runtimes implement the codes the same way, or the error messages the same way, right? So again, close to being compatible, but not quite. Set timeout is another one. We all know, like if you're using browsers, what does set timeout return? Number, right? Typically just, just a number counts up, and then you can pass that in to clear timeout, right? In Node, it returns an object, and that object has behaviors, right? So this particular code right here, this is actually a more efficient way of doing a repeat timer, right? It actually works more efficiently than if you we're using set interval in Node, right? Because we don't have, because set interval has to rearm the timer every time, but there's some other logic that goes in. Here, this refresh, it rearms the timer without doing that additional, the additional work. I have no idea if that's me doing that or not, but this particular bit of code, it's not going to work in workers. It works in Bun because they've implemented it this way. If we ran this in Dino, though, it gets a bit interesting. So if we ran Dino timeout, okay, so we get the a refresh is not a function unless we import set timeout from node timers. Okay, and if we do that and we run that here, it actually will work. So Dino went through and they have the two implementations of set timeout that actually make this thing work, but we have to import it. How much of your code out there, the existing Node code, is specifically importing Node timers to get set timeout, or are you assuming it's a global? Majority of code out there is assuming it's a global, and that it's just going to work. But as we see, it doesn't.
Well, line one won't run anything except Dino.
True. Well, no, it'll run a Node. Like you can import a set timeout from Node timers in Node. All right. The implementation in workers, we've done this as well now. The original implementation did not do that. Bun, you don't need to do this. Their implementation is Node compatible off the start. In fact, out of all the runtimes, Bun is the most Node compatible out there. You cannot be completely Node compatible because Node's not even compatible with itself. But Bun has at least made a significant effort at getting there. If you have not looked at Bun, you need to. It is an amazing piece of software. The team that is working on it, they're absolutely fantastic. I do have a fear that Jared's going to burn himself out someday. Take a vacation, please. Just take some time off. But the team there is doing some fantastic work. So anyway, that was it. I mean, the whole point of this talk was just to kind of peel back that curtain just a little bit and just to show. What I do every day in workers now is trying to make workers act like Node. What the team at Bun is doing every day, they're making it work like Node, right? And Dino, they're doing the same thing. They've been working on this for years. And if you look at every release, like we're improving Node compatibility, we're getting better, right? It is a very difficult problem to solve. There are so many details. Just the Node tests, one directory of the Node tests, if you look at the test parallel directory, something like 250,000 lines of test code, right? And those test files, it's spread like over just over 3,600 individual test files. Some of those test one individual thing. Other ones are like several thousand lines long, testing a whole bunch of different things. And those mix not only the public API service tests, but tests of internals, using Node's own bespoke test harness that we use. So we can't just take those tests and run them and hope they work, especially since like Workers has a completely different runtime model. We can't, it's impossible for us to take those files as is. Majority of the effort that Dino and Bun have put in is making those test files run. In fact, Jared just was talking about it a few weeks ago. They started paying their employees a bonus for every test file that they get running, which is freaking brilliant. Cloudflare, if you're listening. But yeah, so that's it again. I hope it was interesting. There's a lot more to it. Feel free to reach out anytime we can talk about this.